Hello and welcome to Ellevate Design's tutorial on binding off. Binding off is a process of closing off open loops on your knitting needles. We'll use binding off to finish a sample project. For this tutorial, you'll need some yarn, one pair of knitting needles, a pair of scissors, and a small piece of knitting like this one so you can practice binding off. So to work a bind off, we start with a piece of knitting that's worked as far as you want to take the project. I have a sample here that I'm ready to finish. You can see I've worked a bit of knitting and I have a row of active stitches on the left hand needle. I'm set up to start a new row of knitting, holding the right hand needle with no stitches on it, as well as the working yarn in my right hand. If you're knitting left-handed, this will be the other way around. To begin, I knit 2 stitches as I normally would, holding the working yarn behind the right hand needle. Insert the right hand needle into the front of the first stitch on the left hand needle from front to back. Wrap the working yarn around. Pull this yarn through, then slip the stitch off the left hand needle. That's 1 stitch knit, and I'll knit another. Insert the needle, wrap the yarn, pull through, slip the stitch off the left hand needle. Now I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. Next, I use the left hand needle to pick up the first stitch on the right hand needle, lift it over the second stitch, and let it fall off the right hand needle. This secures the first stitch so it won't unwind. I now have 1 fewer stitches on my needles, and I've bound off 1 stitch. Let's try it again. Now that I have 1 stitch on my right hand needle, I need to knit 1 more stitch, so I have 2 stitches on the right hand needle. Next, I use the left hand needle to pick up the first stitch on the right hand needle, lift it over the second stitch, and let it drop off the right hand needle. I'll show you this a few more times. After you've worked a little way down your row of stitches, you'll be able to see the bound off edge forming along the top of your knitting. All the stitches are secured and we are creating a nice clean edge. Now there's one more step to binding off, which is what to do when you get to the end of the row. I'll continue to the last stitch on the left hand needle, binding off as we've done up to this point. At the last stitch, we knit the stitch as usual, bind off 1 stitch as we've done before, and now we have 1 stitch left on the right hand needle. At this point, pull a little extra yarn through to make this stitch larger. Remove the needle and set it aside. Cut the working yarn a little ways away from the knitting. I usually leave 8 to 10 inches of yarn, which leaves some room to weave in the ends, which we'll cover in a different tutorial. So after you cut the yarn, pull the last stitch until the yarn comes through where you bound off the last stitch, like this. The last stitch has now become the loose end that you will weave in, and you've bound off all the stitches to complete your knitting project. So there you have it. Give it a try. Let me know if you get stuck on anything, and subscribe if you'd like to see more of Ellevate Design's Learn to Knit tutorials.